Haggadah is not merely to say the story. Lahagid, Haggadah, has to change a person. Hello, welcome to Erev Pesach, Tavshin Pei Gimel, 2023. I'd like to share with you a few thoughts and insights and stories on the Haggadah and the night of Pesach. Perhaps it'll come to use, to be inspired, you, yourself, your family, those around you. And that's what it's all about. I'd like to start off by saying that we know that the text of what we are going to be reading the night of Pesach is called the Haggadah. And the word Haggadah comes obviously from the word, the mitzvah, v'higadata levincha b'yom hahu lemer. You should repeat, you should tell your son on that day, v'higadata. But the truth is, there's three ways, or the three expressions in the Torah that the story of the Exodus is described. One way is zechira, leman tiskar es yom tzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim. You should remember the day that you go out of Egypt. Another way is sipur, leman tisaper ba'oznei bincha. You should tell the story of you should tell the story to your child. Finally, is v'higadata levincha. Why do we call the story or the experience that we do the night of the Seder v'higadata? So I was thinking, what's the difference between those three expressions, zechira, sipur, and Haggadah? Zechira is very momentarily, very fleeting. You remember it. Indeed, the Shagasarya and other Rishonim and other Achronim, they teach us that the mitzvah to remember the Exodus every single day is only that, a fleeting memory. L'man tisker, you should remember it. You should remember it quickly. And that's enough. Sipur is a longer story, to say the story, and we'll talk about that later maybe in the Haggadah, how even the sages who were very learned and very knowledgeable in the whole Exodus and every aspect of the Exodus, nevertheless, they were misaper b'yitzias Mitzrayim. And the Rebbe tells us the word lesaper comes from the word sapir v'yahalom, to shine it, to make it brilliant like a diamond. The more you talk about it, the more you delve into it, the story becomes much more beautiful. But the Higadata has a whole different connotation, I believe. The Higadata, Haggadah, is not merely to say the story. Lahagid means to impress upon the people that are listening to it that they themselves should become Magidim. They themselves should change. In the olden days, there would be a Magid. He'd come to the city. He wasn't called a Misaper, he was called a Magid. Why? Because the whole point was to change them, to transform people, to transform what they were before into something new. The Pesach experience, the Seder night, cannot be merely a schira, and we'll talk about that later, how the Rebbe brings down, and Reb Chaim of Brisk brings down, that this is indeed the chidush, the novelty of the night of the Seder, that you can't just mention Yitzias Mitzrayim, you have to dwell on it, you have to be at length. So that's of course not going to happen. But not even Sipur is enough, because Sipur connotes only that we're saying a story, and it's not affecting anybody. Lahagid, Haggadah, has to change a person. It has to change the person that he's telling it to. He has to change the audience. And that's why it's very interesting that the whole Seder experience evolves around things. The kaira, the Seder plate, the things on the table, the children, because our sages perhaps knew centuries earlier what modern educators now know, that the true way to educate, the true way to have an effect on a student or on a somebody who is listening to you, is by graphics, is by actually showing them the effect. We have the Matzos and the Maror, and we have the dipping into the Charoses, dipping into the salt water. All these serve as an added expression of exactly what the story was about, and the whole experience has to be done. It says in the Shulchan Aruch, beheseba, reclining as free men, reclining like royalty, because when you show the experience of what it was, it has a much bigger effect. There's even an interesting opinion in Rishonim and even Achreinim that if somebody doesn't have a matzah, he doesn't have the accoutrements of the Seder night, there is no obligation to say the Haggadah. And that's an amazing opinion, but the source, even though halachically perhaps it's not like that, obviously if somebody has nothing else, he should at least say the Haggadah. And unfortunately, in our history, in the various situations that Jews found themselves in, unfortunately on Pesach night, they had nothing else but the Haggadah. But the content of this is, the point of this being that the Pesach night Seder, the Pesach night experience is not merely words, it's words connected with acts, it's words connected with showing what exactly happened, and this is why we call it the Haggadah. There's a very wonderful sefer called the Shalah, Shnei Luchos Abris, from Rabbi Yeshayahu Halevi Horowitz, one of the greatest of the greats. So he writes, there's tremendous reasons, revealed reasons and hidden reasons, and even sisrei starim, hidden within the hidden, for every aspect of the Seder. Meaning even things that we don't think are relevant, or we don't think are important. If it's in the Haggadah, if it's in the Seder night, so says the Shalah, we have to take it very serious. The holiness of the night is a night where we know, the Zohar says, on this night we all eat from the table of God. Mishulchan kavaya kazachi. The children of Israel merit to eat at the Seder of God. And also, a person has to realize that this, in Israel it comes once a year, in Chutz La'aretz it's twice a year. But the Shalah brings down something amazing. He says that since this experience happens only once or twice a year, so each moment of the Seder has to be precious. And he says an amazing statement that is quoted by almost every author who writes Haggadahs, and there's thousands of them. He brings down, V'ro'isi mibnei aliyah, I saw people of a very high stature, T'hamechavev v'mitzvahs, who love mitzvahs, Hayu menashkim hamatzos v'hamoror, they would kiss, literally kiss, the matzahs and the maror, v'chol ha-mitzvahs be'ez mitzvasan, and all the mitzvahs that they did while they were doing the mitzvahs on the Seder night. It was so precious to them that before they actually ate the matzah or ate the maror or dipped the karpas into the salt water, they would give a kiss, because to them it was like an act of a mitzvah, tefillin, a talis, a tzitzis, etc., etc. There was a very wonderful Hasidic Rebbe in Bnei Brak, the Vizhnitzer Rebbe of blessed memory. His name was Reb Chaim Meir, Imre Chaim. And of course he came to Israel after the Holocaust. And he said that he loves Israel so much because his favorite yontif, his favorite holiday was Pesach. And in Israel, they mention Pesach almost every day, many times a day. Wherever he goes, he hears the word Beseder, Beseder, Beseder. And it reminds him of the Seder night. So he has this tremendous appreciation to the people of Israel. Even though it sounds funny, but this is a Jew that lived with the Seder. The Seder meant something to him. The Seder was something that was an expression of his love of God, of his Jewish experience. Apropos to the importance of every single item in the Seder, and every single item in the Seder night, and not to deviate, even if it's something that we think is nothing, I always repeat one of my favorite Hasidic stories. And the story goes like this. There was a wonderful Rebbe, his name was Rabbi Soloveitchik of Belz, and of course, obviously a very holy man. He had thousands of Hasidim. And one year, a few hours before the holiday began, a Chassid who lived 2 hours away from Belz, he had a farm, he came to the Rebbe's house, he went into the kitchen with a sack of carrots. And he tells the kitchen members, he says, I brought the Rebbe these wonderfully beautiful carrots, these wonderfully beautiful shiny carrots that were specially grown for the Rebbe, and I'd like the Rebbe to use them on a Seder plate for karpas. Karpas is an item that is usually the blessing of it is borei pri adama. Some people, my parents for example, would use a potato In the Lubavitch Russian minig, they use an onion or some other type of adama. This Jew came to the Rebbe with a beautifully, wonderful, shiny sack of carrots, and he tells the attendants, he says, please give it to the Rebbe, and tell the Rebbe it's from me to use for the Seder night for karpas. Okay. He go and they open it up, they open up the bag, and they see these beautiful, shiny carrots. It's wonderful. He goes home, 2 hours, takes him 2 hours to go home, and it's now 3-4 hours before the Seder night. So his attendant or his non-Jewish helper comes over to him and says, "Nu patron, nu adon, nu master, how did your rabbi like the carrots?" He goes, "Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he liked it." He says, "Because I knew that these were for your rabbi. So every day, before I went to sleep, I took a can of beer and I poured it over the carrots because I wanted it to be very shiny. I wanted it to be very glorious." And the chassid grabs his head and he says, "You put beer on the carrots? Beer is chametz. I gave the holy Rebbe chametz because of me. The Rebbe is going to have on his Seder plate chametz?" So the Jew, having no other choice, he grabs a fresh horse and he gallops to Bell's, makes it in an hour and a half, and he runs into the kitchen. He says, stop, don't use the carrots." So the kitchen staff looks at him and says, "Okay." And he says, "Where are the carrots?" He says, "Well, the Rebbe came in 2 hours ago and he saw the carrots and he asked, 'What are these things? What is that?' So we told him that a chassid you came an hour ago, a few minutes ago, to drop off these carrots, and you expressly asked that the Rebbe use them for karpas." So the Rebbe said, "Throw them away. Throw them away." So wow, open miracle. The Rebbe smelled that it was chametz. So the Jew was happy that at least nothing happened because of him. But there was a chassid standing there that saw the whole thing, and he went into the Rebbe and he says, "Rebbe, such an open miracle, such an openness that you saw that it was chametz. You saw that it was chametz." So the Rebbe says, "Nothing of the kind, nothing of the sort. But I never heard in my life using carrots for karpas. I never heard of such a minig to use carrots for karpas. And to change a minig on the Seder plate is something that obviously comes from a wrong place." So I told him to throw it away, because we don't change customs. We don't change old things that have been by the Jewish people for hundreds and thousands of years. This story gives us an inkling, an insight at how each detail of the Seder, even what we use on the Seder plate, is so important and is so heavenly and is so significant. So we have the Seder plate, and the Seder plate has many items, and there's tremendous significance in each of the items. I'll just mention one of them for now. One of the items that we have on the Seder plate is an egg. So the reason that we have an egg on the Seder plate, there's a few reasons for it. One simple reason is because in the time of the temple, the Korban Pesach, the Pesach sacrifice, had to be eaten when a person was more or less satiated, was more or less full. No, a guy comes there of Pesach, he's busy all Pesach, and you're going to give him a little piece of matzah, a little piece of meat. It doesn't work. So in order to eat at satiation, there was another korban, there was another sacrifice called the Chagigah. And the Chagigah was a regular, normal sacrifice from a normal animal, a lamb or whatever it was, and the person was able to eat as much as he wants. And when he came close to satiation, then he stopped, and then he ate the Korban Pesach, he ate the Pesach sacrifice, at least a kezayis, at least the size of an olive, the size of an egg, whatever it was, and he ate it reclining, and this was the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. Usually it was towards midnight, towards the end of the Seder, and that's why we have the afikomen, and that's what it is. So in commemoration of this second sacrifice, we put another cooked item, not a piece of meat because we don't want to confuse it, but we put another cooked item and we use an egg. However, the early commentaries, the Kolbo says that the reason we use a beitzah is because in Aramaic, and a lot of the Haggadah is said in Aramaic, we'll get to that in a minute, the beitzah is called beya. In Aramaic, the word beitza is called beya. Matter of fact, there are many people today, many Hasidic groups, that when they learn Masechta Beitza, which starts with Beitza Shenolda B'Yantiv, an egg that was hatched on Yantiv, they don't call it Beitza, they call it Beya. And perhaps it's for the following reason. Says the Kolbay, because the word Beya represents Ba'a Rachmana Lemifrak Yasana Bidra Miramima. We ask God that He should take us out of this exile. Ba'a, we request, we beseech God, He should take us out of this exile with an outstretched hand. And there are some people that say that the reason we take a beitza, that we take an egg, is because an egg is something that we normally give, unfortunately, to a mourner, to an ovel. And the reason for this is because we are mourning. In effect, we're mourning the fact that we cannot bring the Korban Pesach, that we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, and this is a symbol of our distress. In addition to the fact, as everybody says, the first night of Pesach always corresponds to the first night of Tisha B'Av. It always works on the same night, and Tisha B'Av is also the national day of mourning. So we commemorate that with a beitza, and the custom is to broil the egg. I've never, during the rest of the year, we've seen a hard-boiled egg, a soft-boiled egg, a scrambled egg, but here on Pesach night, many people have the custom to broil the egg, and this is in commemoration of the tzli, of the broiling that we did for the Pesach sacrifice. Another important ingredient on the Seder plate, which is full of significance, is the Charoses. It's very interesting. Charoses, the Gemara tells us, and the Shulchan Aruch brings it down, is Zecher Letit. It's in commemoration of the bricks and mortar that the Jewish people had to use to build whatever they built in Egypt for the Egyptians, the pyramids, the Sphinx, who knows what they built over there, Pisam and Ramses. So the Charoses has many ingredients and many customs throughout the world, different customs. And the reason is because we put in order to make a brick, there had to be many ingredients. There had to be wheat, and not wheat, straw, and different types of condiments, and different types of sand, etc., etc. So people put into the Charoses many different things, and each item, the commentaries tell us, has a very meaningful a part of it. The condiments, the cinnamon and the ginger, represents the straw that the Jewish people had to put in. If you remember, at one point in time, Pharaoh told the Jewish people, not only am I not going to make you give me less bricks, but I'm also going to make you collect your own straw. And so we see that straw played a prominent role in the mortars, and we use that as the condiments, so to speak, that are put into the Charoses. We use wine to make it to mold it together, to keep it together, to keep it going. And sometimes some people say you should specifically use red wine, because in commemoration of the blood, sweat, and tears that the Jewish people had while they were creating this tit. And in addition to that, there was also, some people say, and the minig, actually the Chabad minig, is to put an apple, a tapuach, because a tapuach is in commemoration of the way that the Jewish women saved the day by bringing out the passion of their husbands who didn't want to have any more children, and we put in the Charoses, which is a expression of servitude. At the same time, we put in an expression of redemption, and we find this, matter of fact, throughout the Haggadah. It's amazing that throughout the Haggadah, throughout the Seder night, there will be these two converging but dissimilar and even contradictory concepts of servitude and redemption coming together. So here you have the Charoses, which is Zecher Letit, which is the epitome of the servitude, the epitome of the enslavement of the Egyptians to the Jewish people. At the same time, we put Tapuach, which is Zecher Letapuach, Tachas HaTapuach Eirarticha, under the apple tree I aroused you, which represents the beginning of the Geula, the beginning of the redemption. And also it says in Shir HaShirim, El Ginas Egois, to the I guess the garden, the nut garden, and many people put in walnuts. My father, Alav Shalom, would use all these ingredients, apples and walnuts and ginger and cinnamon. Today there's different customs, but this was all a amalgamation, so to speak, of many different things that came together that ultimately resulted in redemption. If there's one group of people that celebrate Pesach, it's the wine merchants. Wine for Pesach has become a billion-dollar industry, if not more. Of course, we all know that one of the primary mitzvahs of Seder night is drinking 4 cups of wine. So I saw an interesting nugget in a incredible sefer called Pirkei de Rabbi Lezer, which is one of the fundamental midrashim. Pirkei Rabbi Lezer says that the night that Moshe Rabbeinu told the Jewish people that they're going to be going out of Egypt, they were celebrating and they were drinking a lot of wine. And because of that, we drink wine on Pesach. The reason we drink 4 cups of wine, that already, like everything else, has many different reasons. So the primary reason brought down in Shulchan Aruch is because there's 4 expressions of Geula, 4 expressions of redemption, 4 promises by God to Moshe Rabbeinu, what he will do to the Jewish people, what he will accomplish by taking them out of Egypt. V'hitzesi, v'hitzalti, I will take them out, I will rescue them, v'go'alti, v'lokachti. So in commemoration of these 4 expressions, we drink 4 cups of wine. In fact, there's a 5th expression of redemption in the pasuk. V'hevesi, God says, I will bring them to the land. So the question becomes, so why do we drink 4 cups of wine? Why not 5? And there's a myriad of answers. One of the answers that I like is because that hasn't really happened yet. We're not at the Geula Shlema, we're not at the complete redemption. God hasn't brought the whole entire Jewish people to the land of Israel. But we have to somehow represent that fifth expression of Vehevesi. So the commentaries tell us that later on in the Seder, before benching, before we say the Birkat Hamazon, we place a 5th cup. And that 5th cup corresponds to the Vehevesi that I just mentioned. And that's the reason why that cup is called Kois Shel Eliyahu. Because Eliyahu is going to be the one that's going to bring the Geula, he's going to herald in the Geula. And the fact that we put that cup of wine, and many people put a big cup of wine, is because we're sure that it's going to happen, and it's going to happen very soon. I'd like to share with you 1 or 2 thoughts about wine, since wine plays such a prominent role in the Seder night. There's a sefer called Mah Nishtana, which is an earlier sefer, and he explains the reason that we use wine on the Seder night is because wine is the only liquid that cannot get interacted with another liquid. The only thing that we can put wine together with to make it better is other wine. The same thing the Jewish people, especially while they were in Egypt, they didn't become assimilated and they didn't become connected to another nation. And that's why we celebrate the Pesach night with wine. And I saw something amazing in the name of Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach from Jerusalem. He asks, why did we choose wine to celebrate redemption, to celebrate the happiness of this night? Why not 4 matzos? Why not 4 fruits? Why not some other delicacy that we can eat 4 of? And he answers something amazing. As we said before, the 4 cups of wine are based on the psukim, v'hitzesi, I took you out, v'hitzalti, I rescued you, v'go'alti, I redeemed you, v'lokachti, and I took you. Each one, if you look into it deeply, you'll see it's another step, another form of redemption going higher and higher. And this is expressly brought out by wine. The only food item, so to speak, that adds happiness the more we eat or the more we drink is wine. When you eat 1 or 2 steaks, by the time you have the 3rd one, you don't want to look at steak anymore. But when you have 1 cup of wine, and then another cup of wine, you're happier. And a 3rd cup of wine can make you even happier. Finally, the 4th cup of wine could even make you the happiest. Because this is the concept of Geula, that God took us out more and more and more. We appreciated the redemption that He took us out on this night. And we celebrate it with 4 cups of wine that adds to our appreciation, that adds to our happiness. As I said before, every aspect of the Seder is meduyak, is exact. So if you look in every single Haggadah, you'll see at the beginning of the Haggadah there's the 15 simonim, the 15, so to speak, indexes of what we're going to do. And there's, of course, the beautiful song, Kadesh Urchatz Karpas Yachatz, and everybody knows it, everybody sings it. So I saw in the name of a very great person a wonderful question. Kadesh Urchatz. Kadesh means to sanctify, and Urchatz means to clean. Shouldn't the order be different? Shouldn't we first Urchatz, clean ourselves of any, so to speak, any spiritual deficiencies, and then Kadesh, and then we should be holy? Why does the Haggadah begin with Kadesh, sanctify, and then Urchatz? And the answer is as important as the Seder itself. This is the beauty of the Seder. This is the significance and importance and the holiness of the regal Seder night. That on Pesach we skip. Pesach means to jump over. Pesach, we don't wait for, God doesn't wait for us to clean ourselves, so to speak. We go straight to the Kadesh. We go straight to the sanctification. And then we could work on our separate things. We could work on our individual details. But on Pesach night, there's a special gift that we go straight to the Kadesh. Each and every Jew is imbued, is infused with spiritual holiness, even though maybe he has other deficiencies, but it comes from God himself. We begin Magid with a very famous paragraph. And the paragraph has so many questions to it that you could fill up a book just on that paragraph itself. We begin by saying, Holach ma'anya, or Chabad says, Heilach ma'anya, the achola v'asana ba'ara de Mitzrayim. This is the bread of affliction. We pick it up, we pick up the kaira, some people have that custom, and we say, this is the bread of affliction that our parents ate in the land of Egypt. And then we continue and we say, Kol dichfin yesei v'yechol, whoever is hungry should come and eat. Kol ditzrich yesei v'yifsach, whoever needs to should come and make the Korban Pesach. Hashata hacha l'shona haba b'aradi Yisrael. Today, now we're here. Next year we'll be in Israel. Hashata avdin l'shona haba b'nei chayrin. Now we're slaves. Now we're servants. But next year we'll be free men. And there's so many questions I can't even get to all of them. I just want to mention a few of them. Number one, why is this in Aramaic? Why is this paragraph of all paragraphs in Aramaic? And number two, we say this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. The matzah that we're going to eat tonight, as we'll see later in the Haggadah, has nothing to do with the matzah that we ate in Egypt. We're going to see later that we'll see matzah zu shanu echel malshuma. Why do we eat matzah? Because we were rushing out of Egypt. Every child knows this. We were rushing out of Egypt, and we had no time to wait for the bread to rise, so we had only matzah. And that's the beauty. We went out of Pesach quickly. Like the Rambam writes, bibahilu yatzanu. We went out bibahola with alacrity. So why do we begin the whole Seder by telling everybody that this matzah, you see this matzah? This matzah is matzah that we ate in the land of Egypt. Let's answer that question first, or let's try to answer it. Indeed, the Ibn Ezra writes that the Jewish people did eat matzah in the land of Egypt. The Egyptian taskmasters, being smart slave masters, wanted to give the Jewish people, their slaves, the minimum food with the maximum effect. And matzah, so to speak, fills the bowels to the point where they don't need a lot. So the Jewish people were given matzah as a bread of affliction, as a bread of slavery. So together, as we said many times tonight, we mentioned the dichotomy of slavery and redemption. We also remember what we ate in the land of Egypt. I recall there were reading people that would come to the Seder wearing the clothing that they received in the concentration camp in Auschwitz. Because part of the remembrance and part of the celebration of redemption is to remember the slavery, to remember the bad days. So we begin the Seder by saying, let's first start about talking about the slavery. Hey lachma anya diachola avosana bar de Mitzrayim. This is the land of the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. So let's remember where we were. I saw another answer. And this is also a very important and critical point that we have to remember, and it weaves itself throughout the entire Haggadah. because we have a general question that we have to ask ourselves. What do you mean we're celebrating redemption? We're still in Gullus. Mashiach didn't come. Most of the Jewish people are not in the land of Israel. Even in the land of Israel, there's issues. So how are we celebrating redemption if we're still avadim, if we're still slaves to a certain degree? And the answer is yes. We have to remember that the Geula has not come yet, that the redemption, the final redemption, is not here, and we're still avadim. However, we have to be avadim la'Kadosh Baruch Hu. There's a positive side to it. We have to learn to be enslaved, but enslaved not to the powers of Paro, not to the powers of the governments. As the previous Rebbe said when he was exiled to Siberia, you could do whatever you want to our bodies, but you cannot do anything to our souls. As the Maral of Prague so famously writes, that the gift that the God Almighty gave to the Jewish people as He took them out of Egypt, that He gave them an injection, He gave them a new gene, a new DNA of being free men. And even later on they'll be enslaved, that's only something temporary. But a permanent Jew, a Jew has a permanence of being a free man. So, hey, lachma anya diachola basana bared Mitzrayim, the bread of affliction, the bread of slavery, also teaches to remind us that we're not there yet. But the way to get there is to be avadim la'Kadosh Baruch Hu, to be avadim, to be slaves to God. And that's what we say, hashata hacha, l'shana haba b'arad Yisrael. We emphasize, yes, now we're here. Now we're still in Gullus. We're not there yet. But next year, we're sure we're going to be in Arad Yisrael. And hashata avdin, and now we are slaves, but l'shana haba b'nei chayrin will be true free men. Because this again emphasizes that even though today we're not in a situation of where we want to be, but we're sure l'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. And one of the reasons that Hey Lachma Anya was said in the Aramaic was because there were times in our history that we couldn't be so proud and we couldn't be so sure to proclaim that next year we're going to Israel. And this itself is an indication of our history. This itself is an indication of where we are. I read a beautiful story. It says in Hey Lachma Anya, Hashata Avdin l'shon haba b'nei chayrin, Hashata hacha l'shon haba b'arad Yisrael. So there was once a beautiful public Seder in an army base in the land of Israel. And the rabbi, who happened to be the chief rabbi, Rabbi Lau, was leading this beautiful Seder. And as he was reading the words of Hashata Hacha, etc., today we're here, and Hashata Avdin, today we're slaves, and next year we'll be in Israel, next year we'll be free. A soldier, typical Israeli soldier, gets up and says, Adoni Arav, sorry, I don't understand. My father was born in Israel. I was born in Israel. I'm hoping my children will be born in Israel. Why are we saying a Seder in the state of Israel, in the land of Israel, that talks about Gullus, that talks about Chutz La'aretz, that talks about a mentality of not being in Israel? I can't accept that. So Rabbi Lau so beautifully answered as follows. He says, my son, you have a wonderful question. And let me tell you my answer. He says, we go on Yom Kippur, we go to daven. When I was younger, I would go specifically to daven in the yeshiva where a very big tzaddik, a very righteous person, who I'm sure acted accordingly a whole year. He acted the way he was supposed to act. And I stood next to him the whole Yom Kippur because I wanted to absorb from this great man. And I recall every time on Yom Kippur when he said al-chait that I did on the sin of this, and the sin of that, on the sin of stealing, on the sin of lying, on the sin of doing all these terrible things, he would bang his chest, and he would cry, and he would wail. And I said to myself, this great man, he sins? This great man stole? He didn't take a penny from anybody. He didn't say a bad word to anybody. He didn't hurt a thing. He didn't hurt a living creature. 5 times in Yom Kippur, twice during each of the 5 prayers, he says al-chait, crying. I couldn't understand it. So at a break, I went over to him and I said, Rebbe, explain to me, why are you crying when you say al-chait? And my teacher looked at me and I said, because when we daven, when we pray, we don't just pray for ourselves. We pray for the whole Jewish nation. We pray for everybody. We don't say al chet shechata si, on the sin that I sinned. We say al chet shechata nu, on the sin that we sinned. When we're standing here, Rabbi Lau told these soldiers, so lucky to be in the state of Israel, in the land of Israel. So what are we saying? What do we tell? We're crying for the rest of the Jewish world that is not yet in Israel. We're including them. Kol Yisrael arevim zeh bazeh. Every single Jew is included. And when we say that today we're slaves, and next year we'll be free, we're having in mind those Jews that are in situations that is not so rosy, not so pleasant. This is the introduction to the Seder. We're not here for ourselves. We're not here only for the people, the 250 soldiers sitting here tonight. We're here representing the entire Jewish nation. I'd like to focus for another few moments on this very important and critical paragraph that we begin the entire Haggadah. We say, Kol dichfin yesei v'yechel. Whoever is hungry should come and eat. Do we really have to tell people, especially Jewish people, that when you're hungry, come and eat? After all, probably most of us didn't eat that much the day of the Seder. By the time we get to the main course, we're all going to be starving. We're all going to jump into it. Do we have to say Kol dichfin? But I believe this represents and answers a fundamental question in Jewish philosophy. Why is there Golus at all? Why didn't God just take us straight into Geula? Why does he have to subjugate us to the pain of exile? And the answer is the famous saying, Yerida Tzerech Aliyah, a descent for the purpose of ascent. Sometimes we have to go down in darkness and not have what we want and not have the revelations in order to later on appreciate the glory of redemption. The whole point of Golus is to appreciate what Geula will be. Kol dichfin, everybody who's hungry, at the end will be Yesei v'yechel. Mashiach will come. It will be Hashat ha'acha l'shon haba b'aradi Yisrael. We will be there. We will receive it. Even though today we're hungry, even though today we don't have that revelation, but it will be and it will come. It will be the Aliyah. One of the highlights of the Seder night is Mah Nishtana. Children the world over spend days and weeks preparing for this moment when their parents will have such nachas from them to say the Mah Nishtana. But really the Mah Nishtana has tremendous questions and tremendous Talmudic implications. Number one, I'll tell you something. We all know it as the 4 questions. But if you count them and you include Mah Nishtana, there's 5 questions. Mah Nishtana halayla zeh is a question. Why is this night different than all other nights? And then we go to the four other ones, the chametz and the dipping, etc., etc. So the Aruch HaShulchan says something very wonderful. He says the word Mah Nishtana doesn't mean Mah Nishtana in a question. He says it as an exclamation. As somebody, a king, or somebody who is sitting royally and appreciating the regalness of tonight, he says, Mah Nishtana halayla zeh. How wonderfully different is this night. And then he goes on to the 4 questions. But the truth is, there's another fundamental question. How does the child know about all the things that he's asking about? He doesn't know that we dip twice. Okay, he saw that we dipped the potato or the onion into salt water. But he doesn't know that we're going to dip the Maror in Charoses. He doesn't know that we're going to eat everything reclining. He doesn't even know that we're going to eat matzah because we haven't eaten matzah yet. So what's going on over here? So there's many answers to this question. One answer is because he's a very smart little boy or girl, and he sees everything on the Seder plate. He sees the matzah and the maror and the charoses, and he sees the salt water on the table. So he assumes that all these things are going to be used. But I'll tell you something Talmudic. I'll tell you a little bit of a quote-unquote pilpul, or something that could answer a difficult Rambam. And this is something that they say over in the house of Brisk, in the name of Reb Chaim of Brisk, that the Rambam writes, opposed to everybody else, when it comes to Mah Nishtana, v'hakoirei omer Mah Nishtana. So in truth, according to the Rambam, the Mah Nishtana was not said by the child. The Mah Nishtana was said by the parent, by the one who's leading the Seder. Later on, it evolved that the children said it. V'omer hakoirei Mah Nishtana. Look at the Rambam, you'll see. And the Rambam, the so to speak, the father, the parent, or the leader of the Haggadah, of the Seder, is saying, look what's going to happen tonight. Every night we have chametz or matzah. Tonight we're only going to give you matzah. Every night we don't dip. Tonight we dip twice. Every night we only eat. We eat either way. Tonight we only eat reclining. In other words, it's the leader of the Haggadah setting the tone for it. Today it's become a custom that everybody says the Mah Nishtana, the 4 questions. And indeed, based on this Rambam, and indeed I think even the Chassam Sofer says this, there is a custom, and Chabad has this custom, that after the children say the Mah Nishtana, all the people around the Seder, all the people around the table say the Mah Nishtana itself. Because the Mah Nishtana is not merely a question of that children ask out of the blue. It's a statement of how the Seder is supposed to be. One of the more prominent paragraphs in the Haggadah is the answer to the 4 questions. Avodim hayinu lefarei b'Mitzrayim, we were servants. If God wouldn't have taken us out of Egypt, we and our children and our grandchildren, etc., would still be mishubadim, would still be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. And the famous question is, the gezerah, the decree of exile, was only for 400 years. So automatically after 400 years, we have to assume that God would have kept his word, and we wouldn't be in exile anymore. So even if God wouldn't have taken us out of Egypt, eventually, after 400 years, we would somehow leave Egypt. Eventually, the Soviet Union crashed after 70 or 80 years. After 400 years, we were given a promise that it would cease. So what are we celebrating? And the answer is, there's 2 types of shibud, there's 2 types of enslavement. There's a physical enslavement and a mindset enslavement. The physical enslavement could be only 400 years. But we could still be a mishubadim, which means a mindset of an Egyptian. And when we say that God took us out of Egypt, not only did God take us out of Egypt physically, but he took Egypt out of us as well. There's 2 types of an eved. There's an eved that is konui, that is to his master as a in his, so to speak, in his body, in his work that he has to do. And then there's an eved that is completely given over to service to his master. What God took, what occurred in Yetzias Mitzrayim, was not merely that God took the body out of Egypt, but he took, so to speak, our soul out of Egypt, and he took us out from shibud. He took us out from that type of slavery. Right after Avodim Bayinu Lefarei b'Mitzrayim, we're told that we have to be Maror L'Saper B'Yetzias Mitzrayim. We have to luxuriate and lengthen the story of Egypt, tell it all night if necessary. And we bring down a story of 5 of the greatest Talmudic rabbis, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Tarfon, and Rabbi Akiva, who were sitting in Bnei Brak, and they were talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim, Kol Eisei Halayla, that whole night, Ad Shebou Talmideim, until their students had to come and tell them, Rabbi Seinu Higia Zman Krishma Shachris. We have to say Shema, rabbis, it's getting late. So number 1, we have a fundamental question. These 5 rabbis were all teachers of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the student of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and to a certain degree even Rabbi Tarfon. So how is it that these rabbis came to the student and not the other way around? Normally the student goes to the rabbis. Matter of fact, there's a halacha that says a person is obligated to receive his teacher on the regel. Nevertheless, we find over here that the greatest rabbis, including the Nasi, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, came to Rabbi Akiva in Bnei Brak. There's a wonderful interpretation, and it's very relevant. This wasn't the time of the Roman Revolution, the time towards the end of the second Beis Hamikdash, when things were getting very, very dangerous and very depressing. And the rabbis came Pesach, and they were looking for inspiration. They were looking for somebody to inspire them. So who did they go to? They went to the person who was known to give inspiration, Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, 2 places in Shas, is the one that gave his friends encouragement. The famous story how the rabbis were walking in the ruins of Jerusalem, and they came to the ruins later on of the Holy of Holies, and they started crying, and Rabbi Akiva was laughing. So Rabbi Akiva asked them, why are you crying? And they asked Rabbi Akiva, why are you laughing? He asked them, why are you crying? And they said, how can we not cry when we see oxen coming out of the Holy of Holies in a place where only the Kohen Gadol would go? And Rabbi Akiva said, that's why I'm laughing, because of a prophecy that I know that for sure the end of the day will be that it will be good. Rabbi Akiva was the epitome of encouragement. So when it came time at this critical moment to find inspiration, they went to Rabbi Akiva. Now, the question is, in those days, students had a lot of respect for their teachers. The teachers were learning, we're talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim a whole night, and the students came and interrupted them. What's going on over here? So the answer is, because the Kriya Shema represents Geula, represents redemption to a certain degree, where we see Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, God is one. These 5 great rabbis, the 5 greatest Tanoim, they were talking about, they were like the Rebbe says, sapir, l'saper. They made Yetzias Mitzrayim like a sapphire. They were talking about the Exodus to such a degree that to them it was already Geula. To them it was already night. It was already day. It was already light. So the students came begging them, rabbis, it's not enough that by you it's already Shachris. It's not enough that by you it's already light. We also want to feel light. We also want to feel a degree of consolation and a degree that we're going out of darkness. This wasn't a chutzpah, so to speak. This was a cry for help, a cry of a student begging his teacher for the same inspiration that he has. It's very interesting that right away Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says a Talmudic halacha. He says that I tried for many years to institute that we should say Yetzias Mitzrayim at night, and I wasn't successful. Ad Sheba ben Zayma, until Ben Zayma came, and because of him we're saying it. So what is the Baal Haggadah trying to tell us over here? I mean, we have many halachas that we could learn. Why are we learning this halacha? And this is not even something that's connected to Pesach. This is something that's connected to every single day. There's a mitzvah of Yetzias Mitzrayim twice a day, not only Pesach. So what is the Haggadah telling us about this whole thing? What is the inspiration that we're to learn from this? So I saw something very beautiful. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah had it all. He was a miyuchas, he was the 10th generation to Ezra. He was very wealthy, tremendously wealthy. They couldn't even calculate the meiser, the tithing that he had of his animals. He was the head of the Sanhedrin. He was tremendous. He couldn't convince his friends to that the halacha is like him. Ad Sheba ben Zayma. Who's Ben Zayma? Ben Zayma, in Talmudic terms, was not a successful person. Ben Zayma, according to many opinions, never got married. Ben Zayma, according to many opinions, never had smicha, which is why they called him Ben Zayma. Ben Zayma was a person who, so to speak, didn't succeed. And this comes to teach us a very important lesson. That just because you have everything doesn't mean that you're going to be successful. Doesn't mean that you're going to be the one to convince everybody else. Sometimes it's the person who you think has much less, and he's the one who is going to be successful in convincing everybody. There's a tremendous lesson over here. Everybody should realize he has self-worth. He has something to give. Even Ben Zayma, who corresponding to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, was not very high on the totem pole. But it was only because of Ben Zayma that he was able to convince the rabbis to do the halacha, not Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. The famous 4 sons, Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah. Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah, Echad Chacham, Echad Rasha, Echad Tam, Echad She'ene Yedei Alisha. What does it mean, Keneged? The word Keneged doesn't have any sense over here. It should say, HaTorah Midaber Al Arba Banim. The Torah teaches us on 4 sons. So one of the answers is that it's not talking about 4 separate people. It's talking about the 4 people in ourselves. Kineged Arba Banim, corresponding to the 4 types of people we all carry within us. We all have the Ben Chacham, where we think we're wise guys. We all have the Rasha, we tend to do things that we know are not really so kosher. We all have the Tam, we have a simpleness, and to a certain degree we're all She'eni Yedei Elisha, we all don't know. So Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah, Torah has an answer to each and every malaise, each and every question, and each and every product that comes up in our own lives. So why does the Rasha come after the Chacham? The Rasha, the wicked son, should be the last. Because everybody's better than the Rasha. Of course the Chacham, the wise son, the Tam, the simple son, and the She'eni Yedei Elisha, they're not Rishayim, they may not have an education, but they're not wicked. Says the Rebbe that the Rasha comes after the Chacham because it's the obligation of the Chacham to sit next to the Rasha, to find and search out the Rasha and teach him, and make him not become a Rasha. We can't put the Rasha at the end of the line, so to speak. The Chacham has to be next to the Rasha to inspire him. Why does it say Echad Chacham, Ve'echad Rasha, Echad Tam, Echad Shedei Elisha? If my editor would edit the Haggadah, he would take out the Echad each time. Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah, the Torah speaks about 4 children, Chacham, Rasha, Tam, Shedei Elisha. Says the previous Rebbe something precious. In each Jew, there's the Echad. Each and every Jew, even a Rasha, contains an Echad, contains the neshama, the precious neshama within him, and he doesn't have to remain a Rasha, or even a Tam, or even a Shedei Elisha for long. Echad Chacham, the Echad Rasha. Even a Rasha has an Echad. In the next paragraph of the Haggadah, details what each of the 4 sons say. And it begins with Chacham Mahu Eimer. So again, a precious word from the previous Rebbe. Chacham Mahu Eimer. A Chacham, what he is, Eimer, he talks. The way we can tell a person is the way he speaks. After the answer to the Chacham, we come to the Rasha. Why is he a Rasha? Why is he wicked? So the Haggadah tells us because he excludes himself from everybody else. It's to you, not to me. So the Rishonim ask a question that the Chacham also uses verbiage that is exclusionary. He uses the word eschem. He says, eschem. So the word eschem also is exclusionary. Why do we call him a Chacham? And the answer that the Rishonim themselves give is because even though the Chacham is asking his parents, what's going on over here, he's saying eschem, but he includes himself in them. He says, Hashem Elokeinu. Not only does he mention God, which the Russian doesn't even mention, but he mentions God as if it's his God, Hashem Elokeinu. Which brings us to know that the difference between the Chacham and the Rasha is that the Chacham feels that God is his God, and the Rasha wants nothing to do with God. I want to zoom into the paragraph about the Rasha. There's a very troubling statement here. Let's read it together. Rasha Mahu Eimer, what does the Rasha say? Moha Aveda Zeis Lachem, Lachem V'Leiloi, Ulefi Shahitzi Es Atzmi Min HaKlal, since he took him out of the general population. Kafar Be'ikar, he denied God. V'Af'ata, and you, what should you do? Hakei Yashinav, knock out his teeth, blunt his teeth. Is that the way for a Chacham to act? To knock out the teeth of a Rasha? Violence? Is that the answer? I want to share with you something very beautiful that I saw in a Haggadah that was just printed from a very great rabbi of the previous generation called Reb Meir Yechiel of Ostrovtza. He was a tremendous Torah giant, a tremendous Torah scholar. Listen to what he has to say. He says as follows. One of the biggest problems of a Rasha is that he comes to a point where he doesn't understand a part of Torah or a part of the Jewish tradition. And he doesn't bother to ask, to learn, to study, to delve into it. He just leaves. And we explain to him that the truth is that there is reasons for everything, and there are ways to understand things. What is a teeth? Teeth is something that brings out the flavor in food. The Talmud says that if bala maror lo yatsa, if we want to enhance, if we want to taste the bitter herbs on Pesach, we have to chew it. If you merely swallow the bitter herbs, you won't have the effect, because teeth, chewing a food, brings out its taste. When a person has a question, when a person has something he doesn't understand, he has to use his teeth. He has to chew it over. He has to delve into it. There's answers to everything. If you don't want to use it, hakei ashina, blunt his teeth. Tell him that it's a pity you're not using it. Of course, we encourage him to study and to get educated, but we have to make him realize that it's his lacking and not ours. Continuing on the theme of hakei ashina, blunt his teeth, which seems like a very violent reaction, the Abu Drama and the Ritva says something very simple. They say the Ben Rasha is sitting around the Seder table, but Haitzi Asma Min HaKlal, he's taking himself out of the general population, meaning he doesn't want to eat. When a person doesn't eat, eventually his teeth get blunted. The Alshich says something very amazing and very beautiful, and it's become very well known in the Jewish world. The word Rasha, Reish Shin Ayin, is the gematria, the numerical value of 570. Take away from 570 the word Shinav, the word teeth, Shinav, so you're taking away 366. 570 minus 366 from the word Rasha leaves you with 204, which is exactly the gematria of Tzaddik. And the intent and the content over here is very beautiful. Like the Alter Rebbe says, every single Jew is a tzaddik. Every single Jew, by his essence, has really in him as an neshama as a tzaddik. What only the externalities, his shinayim, his teeth that come later. What we're telling the Rasha, we're telling the Ben Chacham how to deal with the Rasha. Don't get rid of him. Get rid of his shinav. Get rid of his evilness. Get rid of those things that make him into a Rasha and transform him into a tzaddik. On the other hand, there are those commentaries that say that when we deal with heretics and we deal with those that laugh at Torah, we sometimes have a tendency to be too apologetic. Says the Bal Haggadah, the way to deal with these things is hakei yashinav. Do it in a forceful way. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be ashamed. Say it the way it is, and don't be and say the truth, and the truth will stand by itself. The fourth son of the Haggadah is the she'ene yedei alisho, the one who doesn't know how to ask. Seemingly, this is a very low level, a child who doesn't even know, who doesn't have the intellect to ask a question. However, the Hasidic masters have turned this around typically, and turned the she'ene yedei alisho into somebody of a very high level, a very high darga in emunah, a very high level in faith. There's a very beautiful story that I just read about the Tasha Rebbe. He was a Hasidic Rebbe who passed away recently. People would come to ask him for blessings and leave money for him to distribute to poor people. So one time, the Tasha Rebbe noticed that waiting in line was a man who he knew to be very, very poor and is about to marry off one of his children, and obviously he had no money. Behind this man was a very wealthy man. So the Tasha Rebbe called in his attendant, called in his gabbai, and he tells him, he says, do me a favor, first send in the wealthy man, and then the other guy. So the guy goes out, the attendant goes out, and true to his Rebbe's word, tells the poor man to wait a minute, pulls out the wealthy man, and tells him to go in. The wealthy man, sure enough, comes to the Rebbe, tells him joyfully about a very good business deal that he just did, based on a blessing of the Rebbe, and he hands the Rebbe a large amount of money. And he goes out. Then the poor man comes in. The intent of the Tasha Rebbe was that because this rich man was waiting in line, and he was going to add to the money already on the table, the Tasha Rebbe would now be able to give this poor man even more money. However, the poor man didn't understand this. And the minute he walked into the Rebbe's room, he started crying and screaming. He says, why? Just because I'm poor, I don't deserve to be treated like a mensch? That you let in a rich man before me? In other words, he just didn't understand what's going on. He didn't understand the benefit of what the Tasha Rebbe wanted to do. Sometimes a she'ene yedei alisho, somebody who doesn't ask questions, somebody who works with complete and perfect faith, is on a very high level, is on a level that is even higher than somebody who has the intellect and uses it in the wrong way. Continuing in the Haggadah, we come to the paragraph almost in the middle of Magid, V'hi she'amda laveseinu v'lanu, and this is what stood us by while God protected us. V'hi she'amda. And the instruction is, before we say V'hi she'amda, we cover the matzah and we lift up the cup of wine. Says the Chassam Sofer, what is the significance of covering the matzah and lifting the wine? And the answer is because it is those things that our sages instituted to separate us from the nations, namely, for example, not to drink wine with them and other things. This is what kept us as a nation. Even though matzah is biblical and 4 cups of wine is only rabbinic, it is those rabbinic ordinances that kept the Jewish people going. Some people laugh at customs and say, it's only a minig, it's only a custom. But in those customs, says the Chassam Sofer, V'hi she'amda lanu. This is what stood us by. And continuing on the theme that we said earlier, V'hi she'amda laveseinu, the cup of wine. Just like wine does not tolerate any mixture of any other type of liquid, the same thing the Jewish nation doesn't tolerate mixture of any other nation. As we continue the Haggadah, we come to a part where it says as follows, V'yata samcha Hashem k'choichvei hashamayim l'roiv. God placed you like stars of the heavens. This is a very wonderful word from the Baal Shem Tov. And he explains that a Jew is like a star. Just like a star, from far it seems very, very small, because we don't really understand how great it is because we're so far from it. But the closer we get to the star, we see how big it is. The same thing a Jew. We don't always understand the greatness and preciousness of another Jew because we're looking at him far. But if we get close to him, we understand the essence of a Jew, we will understand how great he is and how big he is. Towards the end of the Haggadah, we come to Rabbi Gamliel, who said that at the night of Pesach, a Jew has to say three things in order to fulfill his obligation. He has to say and explain Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Interestingly, the Rambam in Hilchas Chametz Matzah, when it comes to the halachas, gives the order differently. He gives the order not Pesach Matzah Maror, Pesach Maror Matzah. Why the difference? Rabbi Soloveitchik answers brilliantly. In the halacha, we know that Maror was subservient to the Pesach. As long as Korban Pesach was a true mitzvah, so Maror was right there with it. And only afterwards came Matzah. But once Pesach ceased to be a mitzvah, once there was no longer a Korban Pesach, Maror is no longer connected to Pesach. Maror is a mitzvah by itself, just to remember the Maror. It's a rabbinic enactment. Homiletically, let us say that in Gullus and in our lives, Maror should always be the last part. Maror should always be the last and least important part of our existence. We've had enough Maror. Let's go on to the Pesach and the Matzah. Like we say, Al Geula Seinu, Val Pedus Nafshenu. We go on to the Geula, which is represented by the Pesach and the Matzah. I'd like to conclude with the famous saying of the Holy Rebbe of Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. We find that there's two ways that the holiday of Passover is called. In Torah it's called Chag HaMatzos, the holiday of Matzah. But the Jewish people call it Pesach. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak explains as follows, that God is praising the Jewish people and complimenting them, and the Jewish people is praising and complimenting God. God is praising the Jewish people for keeping all these intricate and difficult laws, not eating bread and only eating matzah, and all the things that come with it. And the Jewish people are praising God for skipping over their house and landing the afflictions on the house of the Egyptians. So each one is proud of the other. Let us all hope that in this Pesach, where we both keep the matzahs and God enters our home with blessings for ourselves, for our families, and L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim.